All right, so let's first go ahead and start by setting up our project folder. I created a new folder. Mine is called Demo Pen 8. You can call yours, Assignment Pen 8, whatever you want to call it. But I don't have any files in it yet, so I'm going to go ahead and in brackets, I'm going to do a new file. And by the way, you could be doing this in CodePen as well. I'm just kind of switching back and forth so that you can see the difference of how to do this in different tools. So first thing I'm going to do is I created a new file, and if you remember, it doesn't assign in brackets, it doesn't assign a file type, and it's just sort of a text file. So before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save it, and I'll do a save as, and I'm going to save it in my demo 8 folder as index.html, like that. So that way it automatically gives it a file type. So now I can go up here and I can choose my edit, and I can go to HTML templates, and this is, if you remember, I've asked you in the past to go ahead and install this template. It's a template called HTML templates, or a plugin called HTML templates. I'm going to choose the HTML5 doc type, and then it goes ahead and puts the standard stuff there for me. It also goes ahead and it puts a link to a CSS page, and I'm not going to use this pathway. I'm just going to change it. In fact, I'm going to change mine to, I'll get rid of that CSS folder and I'll just leave it as main.css. A lot of times I'll call my style sheet styles.css, but if you're using this, you can just use main.css, and I'm not going to put it in a CSS folder. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then the next thing I'll do is I'll create a new file again, and I'll do file save as again. Oh, there we go. And this time I'll call it main.css, and I'm just going to keep it right there in the same folder. All right, and then I've got my two basic files here now. Now the other thing that you can go ahead and do is, let's just put this back into a vertical split, and I'm going to choose this pane. I'm going to click on main CSS, and then now we've got both files open. We've got our CSS on the right and our HTML on the left. I'm going to change the title of this to volunteer sign up form. All right, because that's going to be, in theory, what it is that we're making. And we'll go ahead down here in the body, and we'll make an H1 just to get started. Okay, I'm not going to do anything fancy yet, and I'll just call that, I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it again, volunteer sign up form. Okay, go ahead and save it. And I'm going to go ahead and load my fonts before I do anything else, and that way I don't have to look at Times New Roman. So I'm going to jump over here. I've already pulled my fonts up. I selected my two families from Google Fonts, and I pulled my two selections up. I went ahead and I customized it so that I'm just doing regular Montserrat, and I'm doing regular and bold for Lato. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead, I can either embed it, and we haven't really talked about this so much in this class. I've only shown you how you can just use @import. So I'm also going to show you how you can do a standard method where you actually pull the font API, or the Google font script stuff, into your page using this link, and that's in the HTML. But then also you still have to specify it in the CSS. But I want to show you how to do this instead of just using @import. Either way is totally acceptable. So far we've been using @import. This is a little bit faster because it loads before the CSS loads. So I'm just going to show you this, and by the way, if you're using CodePen, then you can only use @import, and that's fine. Or I think that might be the standard way. I don't know if you can only use it, but anyway, if you use it here in the HTML, what's very important is that you load it before you load your style sheet. So I would put this on line 7 here, this link reference. I would put that on line 7 if my style sheet is on line 8. And the reason is that I need to pull in the API before I start referencing it in this style sheet that gets loaded next. Okay, so and then we'll go ahead and in our in our style sheet, let's jump back over here. We'll choose the font family options. These are going to be the two font family options. Let's copy these. And I'm just going to jump back over here into brackets. And first of all, let's do, before we do anything else, I'm also going to go ahead and set up my my everything selector for, let's do box sizing, and we'll do border box. Okay, so that'll be the first thing that we need to do. And then the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and set up the body font. So we'll do that as a body rule. And right now I just went ahead and I pasted both of these in, but I really just want Lato to be the body font. So I'm gonna cut the Montserrat out. And we'll go ahead and set that up as a standard font size. We'll go ahead and set that up as a standard, like let's do maybe a 17 pixel base for the standard font size. And we'll do color and oops, color, not colot. And let's do it as, I'll do -333, so it's a very dark gray. And we'll just kind of stick with that. And then the other thing that I can do is I could go ahead and set up my H1 heading level, and we'll do that as the font family of Montserrat. Okay, just for right now, let's just go ahead and save that. And then if you wanted to see what it looks like, all it would have right now is this volunteer sign up information. But you could go ahead and open it just so we have it handy and you can look at it. So let's do that. And there are two ways that you can do that. You can either use this live preview button like this, okay? And here's what we've got. And remember, if you use live preview, what it's doing is if you look up in the URL, this is just a reminder. You should already know this, but sometimes I think people forget. If you see this where it says like 127.0.0.1, blah, 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 then that means that it's using live preview mode. And every once in a blue moon, live preview mode will get messed up. So sometimes, oh, and if you're using JavaScript, forget it. All right, live preview mode doesn't work very well at all, if at all, with JavaScript because brackets is built on JavaScript. And so sometimes the JavaScript can't test run JavaScript, if that makes sense. So an alternate way of testing this then would be to actually go and find it. I'm going to close this. Would be to go and find it on your actual computer. And so this is my demo 8 or my demo pen 8 folder that I was telling you about. And what I could do is instead of using live preview mode, I can just open it in Chrome here. If your default browser is not Chrome, if it's something else and you want to open it in Chrome so that you can follow along with what I do, then you can just right click and say open with Chrome. Mine happens to be the default for Chrome. Yours might not be. But anyway, you see the difference in what it says up here in the URL. It's not telling me it's 127.0.0.1 anymore, which is like a little web service that Brackets runs to kind of do the live preview. It's actually opening the file, and so that means that it can only look at the saved version of the file. So if, as a reminder, you'd have to constantly save your changes in Brackets, but then you only have to ever just come here and hit the refresh button. And so I kind of like doing it that way. So that's a good way to just like get your files set up. Now, we actually need to, before we just start typing stuff, we need to plan for what's going to go into this form. So I have a little text document started, and it says volunteer sign up here. I'll make it bigger so you can see it maybe a little bit better. All right, and so let's just, in a little text form, let's just do some planning. So some things that you definitely need from a volunteer is you need the person's name. All right, and you have to decide whether or not you want two different fields, first name and last name, separate, or if you want first name and last name together. I think for the sake of what we're doing, we can have first and last. I think that'll be just fine, okay? All right, and then we also definitely want their email address, okay? We also definitely want their telephone, all right? And if this is actually a sign up, right, if it's not, all right, so you have to make a decision in what you're going to do. If what you're actually doing is just collecting information, then this might be good enough for contact information. But if what you want to do is allow them to sign up, like if it was on a web page and they become a member of your website, or maybe they're doing a sign up so that they can log in somewhere, then you would also need a password. And you would need to decide on what that person's username is going to be. Do you give them a choice to sign up with a username, or do you just allow their email, for instance, to be their username? And the thing is that you'd always have to think of a username as being unique. It can't be something that anyone else has. And by default, built into an email address, that means that it's going to have uniqueness. So you could just rely on the person's email address as their login for their username, and then you just ask them to provide a password, right? Okay, so this is going to be a really simple form. I'm not going to go into all the depths of like form validation and stuff, you know, like where if somebody doesn't fill something out, you know, some part of the form, that it tells them that they need to go back and fill it in, because that uses scripting and stuff. We're not going to get into that. But I'm also not going to have you confirm the password twice, things like that. But these are the things that I think you might need to know if you were trying to get somebody to volunteer. You could ask a question, you know, like, is it okay to text? I'm not going to type it because I'm not going to ask that question, but that could be a question that you wanted to know. So, but the point is, when you're starting to fill out a form or to design a form, you want to think of all the questions that you might need to gather from somebody so that you don't, you know, just put too little on there and then you get certain information and then later go, gosh, I wish I really had this information about that person, you know, and then have to figure out how to go back and ask them for it. You don't want to have to do that. Ideally, you want to design the form to be really succinct and short, but also that fulfills the needs that you have, right, in collecting their user information. And you also have to decide on how invasive to be. Like if you're going to require fields, and again, we're not getting into making required fields in this tutorial, but if you're going to get into, you know, like making certain fields required, you need to make sure that it's not going to start to annoy them that you're asking for this information. The other thing to remember when you're designing a form is that you may want every last piece of information in the world, right? But they may not, one, want to give it to you, B, they may not have the time to give it to you. C, they might be like on a mobile device where filling out a form is kind of a pain in the butt, right? And they just want to sign up for something fast and just, you know, get on with their day. So you want to be careful not to use the wrong types of fields, and you also want to be careful to make it so that they can very easily fill this form out without having to type too much. So name, obviously they have to fill out a name. Email, they have to fill out an email. Telephone is something that they have to input. You can't have it as a predefined option to select from. And password, if again, that's something that they have to type. Now, some other things that I might want to know, let's say that this volunteer event is something where they need to be of a certain age for parental consent. You know, because I wouldn't want minors to come and volunteer and then I'm responsible for minors and their parents don't know what they're doing. So one of the things that I might have is a group of questions about their age requirement. So I'll put age requirement, okay? And under that age requirement, I might have like a few questions, such as, let's say, I'm just going to paste these in so you don't have to watch me type. Maybe you want them to say, I'm 18 or older, I'll be 18 by the time of the event to volunteer. I am under 18, but I still want to receive future email about upcoming events. Like, you know, those could be some things. Maybe this is something that would get filed away in like an Excel spreadsheet or in a database or whatever, right? And then you might also think about like, what is the prompt going to be so that you're basically telling them why you're asking this, right? So I might come here and I might have a question that is, you know, like maybe that's something that I would say to them, that you have to be 18 or older to sign up to be a volunteer. Now, these three options, you wouldn't have more than one option, right? You would only be able to select one of those because you can't have more than one of these things be true at the same time. So this is going to be something where you have radio buttons, all right? And we'll talk about what radio buttons are. Radio buttons are a type of, they're a type of input, all right? Let's make that a little smaller too. They're a type of input that, it's like the little circle right, that we clicked in before, where you can only choose one option, right? It forces you to choose one option, and whichever thing is selected, that becomes the value of this field, okay, that gets sent into the form. Okay, so that's one thing I might need to know. Another thing I need to know is, like, what is it that the person wants to do to volunteer? So let's do that. Yeah, let's just type this. We'll say volunteering interests. That'll be kind of interests. That'll be the kind of the general area, right? And then let's I'm just gonna paste some stuff in. So these are the different volunteer options that people would have for this event. They could either do ticket taking, they could hand out water bottles, set up, or clean up, right? So that's something I would need to know, but this could be something where maybe I don't want to force them to choose only one, because maybe they're willing to do any of them, and I only really need somebody for one or two different types of things, right? And so I don't want to limit myself in getting volunteerism. So in this case, this would be checkboxes. All right, checkboxes allow multiple. All right, choose. We'll say choose all that apply, or something like that. And this would be choose one, right? We don't have to type that, but the idea is that you're only going to choose one. This is choose all that apply. All right, and then maybe the last thing that we want to do is give them a place where they can write something, write a comment. And we also might want to ask them, you know, like, maybe there's some other things for other events in the future where they've got special talents that we would want to call them about. So we could also have a text field that is a longer text field that allows us to type content. So we'll call that, let's just call that special skills or something like that. And we'll make that bigger. And here's maybe something that we could say: please let us know if you have any special interests or skills that you'd like to tell us about, in case, you know, we can use your talents for future events. All right, and so the type of thing that this is called, it's called text area. All right, and the difference between this and, say, these ones up here, right, this would be text input. Okay, and here I'll make this smaller so that it's a little bit like that, a little bit more uniform. Okay, and this one would be email input. This one would be phone. Oh, hold on. Actually, when I say phone, the actual input type is called TEL, but it's the same as a phone, right? And then this input, as you can imagine, would be called password input. And the type of input that you designate will help, as I mentioned before in a different video, it'll help auto completion form options in your browsers autocomplete properly, so it doesn't like stick email in a telephone input, or stick, you know, an email and a password or something like that. It helps the form memories. It helps them remember where to put things properly. But in addition to that, also password, like for instance, will bullet out on the screen so that somebody can't see what you're typing. Now the difference, as I was saying here before, between this text input field and this thing down here called text area, is that this is a short, it's intended to be a short amount of text. This one down here can be much longer. You can limit the characters. You can limit the length of any of these, but this one is traditionally, it's resizable by default, so that somebody can pull it open more to have more room to type, whereas, you know, these types are not, and so on. But this might be like a good starting place for us. And then of course the last thing that you're going to need is, you need, you know, a submit button. All right, that's something else that should go kind of without saying, but we'll go ahead and put it in there so that we don't forget. All right, So this is a good way to kind of plan for your form, and you can have somebody else look it over and make sure that you're getting all the information that you actually need. But just remember, you don't want to ask for too much. Anyway, so this is a good place to start, and we can use this as a way to gauge how we're going to build our form.